today's researcher-facing track topic is around a document that was written a few years ago on the leading practices of facilitation. We're going to have a speaker in just a minute share more about that, but first we wanted to poll the audience to see where you all are coming from. So we've got a poll, so you'll need to open a web browser, go to menti.com and put in the code that's on the top of the slide there. So 3541-2743. I'll put those in the chat. So we can get a sense of what people already know about the leading practices of facilitation. Have you not heard of it, but not really looked at it? And or have you heard of it and actually at least gone to the website, read it, used it, to get a sense of where the audience is coming from? And Lauren has helpfully put the link to what we're talking about in the chat. For those of you who haven't heard of it, or wouldn't even who had heard of it and don't know where it is, where it's located online. Okay.
Christina, can you reiterate how we provide this input?
To the poll?
Yes.
Yes. So if you wanted to vote in the poll, have a web browser open and go to menti.com, which I also put in the chat. And then you have to enter a code, which should take you to this first question. And we're going to have a few more survey questions later in the call today. So feel free to just leave this window open in the background once you've voted, so that you're ready for some of our follow-up survey questions.
Looks like we've got a good mix here. A lot of folks haven't heard of it, which is no problem at all. Some folks have heard of it, haven't used it, and a handful of people have used it. Nice.
All right.
Cool.
Cool. Well, thanks everyone who participated, and anticipating that some of you would not have heard about the leading practices of facilitation, we wanted to kick off the call today with a short presentation about them. And that's going to be provided by Lauren Michael, who's a lead research computing facilitator at the Center for High Throughput Computing at UW-Madison, and as well with the OSG. I don't know all the teams that you're on, Lauren, but the OSG research support team, campus facilitation team, different efforts with that underneath the PATH project. So Lauren, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks. And I'll start sharing screen. I don't have slides, but I'm really just going to walk you through the leading practices of facilitation put together by the ACI-REF project. And the reason why I'm one of the people who would be appropriate to give an introduction is that during the ACI-REF project, I was the lead facilitator and also led the team that put together the leading practices of facilitation, which was made up of a subset of the facilitators who contributed to the ACI-REF project. And this is a project that wrapped up in 2018, started in 2013, that brought together 6 campuses, sort of demonstrating the benefits and really experimenting in real time with facilitation practices and principles. And then we reported on a lot of what we found were sort of commonalities and agreed upon definitions of what facilitation is and what information a new facilitator might need to help get going in their role. So it really hasn't been touched in 3 years. It also comes from a perspective that I think is apparent in the content of the fact that all of our campuses and facilitators who contributed to it worked in the context of campus research computing centers, so large-scale research computing centers. And so there are examples and whatnot that comes kind of specifically from that context. But I think there are some general principles that really still hold up today, even across different contexts of research computing and data facilitation. So the leading practices of facilitation, as we put it together, is organized with an introduction that talks about some of these principles and philosophies of facilitation, talks about what types of professional activities are not facilitation, though they may still be important for supporting research, computing, and data, just to kind of distinguish and be specific about what we mean by facilitation. And then the bulk of the leading practices breaks down into kind of chapters on major activities of facilitation and provides some sort of pragmatic guidance on, say, how to carry out an engagement meeting or an initial consultation with a researcher to help provide guidance and liaise their use of various ACI services, perhaps some that are offered by the facilitators organization that they work in, or how to conduct outreach, or how to liaise with other providers of ACI resources. So we'll look at those. But all of this is introduced well in the introduction. And then there are some definitions. There's an appendix as well, a page on how to contribute, because all of the source material is based in Markdown in a GitHub repository. So you can contribute that way, or by contacting and providing input on what you'd like to see changed, if not with a pull request in GitHub, and then some acknowledgements as well. So I'll just focus on showing you these two things, because I imagine you can poke around on the definitions appendix, contribute and acknowledgements on your own. So in the introduction and on most of the chapters, we've got a table of contents at the top that can jump you to different components. But we talk about the goals and motivating factors for establishing facilitation leading practices, just like I described them to you. Here we talk about what is facilitation, philosophically, what characteristics and features really exemplify facilitation. For example, providing personalized consulting and guidance, helping researchers to select from various tools, services, and doing so in a sort of technology agnostic kind of way, teaching researchers to fish and to use advanced cyber infrastructure, which is what we mean by ACI, on their own. And then these are supported basically in the practices that are described in the chapters. This is where we talk about facilitation is not. So it's not things like building and configuring cyber infrastructure systems, or developing software for groups, or running computational work for specific research groups. Some of these things are important for getting research done using computation and data, but are not necessarily considered facilitation. And then in terms of practices and the sort of pragmatic content in the chapters, those are all introduced here with jumps to the different chapters. So brief descriptions here for each of those, including things like metrics and assessment for understanding where your effort's going as a facilitator, hints on figuring out how impactful it is, including qualitative input. And then we go into traits and professional background that are most useful for facilitators. Certainly not considered to be like a hard and fast rule or something. But the other way to get to the chapters, and I'll show you one of those, is to jump up here in this main menu, or from the main page, major activities. And so then we've got a list of them here. So for example, one of the ones I like is assisting researchers in the use of ACI services. This is sort of like how you would provide ongoing support, talks about effective communication. The chapter that's on education and training of researchers leverages and links to references that talk about effective technical communication. So we did some research here looking into sort of other resources that talk about how to do each of these different 10 activities well, and try to reference those too. So there's a lot of good information here. Jumping back to the one on assisting researchers in the use of ACI resources, it even has sort of like snippets. So it talks about how you could do this with scheduled appointments, office hours, on demand, chat, phone, email, etc. But it even has some examples. Sorry if I'm scrolling really fast, but there's one that I kind of want to show you. So sort of like the stages of providing support through email, clarify the user's problem, identify the issues and appropriate solutions, communicate next steps to the user, and then kind of an example of an email exchange that hopefully demonstrates these. So some of the other chapters have something similar, like a template for a follow-up email you might send after a new engagement, and that sort of thing. So the chapters are sort of more of a practical resource, but the philosophical and sort of principles aspects of facilitation are in the intro. So with that, are there any questions that I could answer about the leading practices as it stands?
Yeah, if anyone has questions for Lauren kind of about this document or the contents, you can unmute and ask, or put a question into the chat if you're not able to speak out loud.
Hey, Lauren, this is Justin. I guess I was curious, how do you feel that this, after all this work you put into this 3 years ago, how well do you think it's holding up?
Like I said before, you know, the term research computing facilitator, which is specific to research computing, you know, kind of originated at the same time that the ACI-REF project started, and that term has really taken off. The idea of facilitators has really taken off, right? So I think facilitation across different aspects of research computing and data, research cyber infrastructure, however you want to refer to, you know, the community of people and professional roles that we do in supporting research in a researcher-facing way. It really has taken off, and I think we acknowledge even in the introduction that we understand that facilitation occurs in different contexts of, you know, institutional resources around research computing, around funding for facilitation specifically. So the introduction, I think, really applies well generally. But like I said, the term facilitator, facilitation, those terms have really taken off, and I think have been explored more specifically in contexts outside of research computing that I don't think are very well represented here. There's nothing, like I said, in particular in the introduction that I think excludes them. But certainly the examples and the practical content in the 10 chapters has some specificity to research computing.
Thanks. Lauren, there was a question in the chat from Henry. Can you point us to peer-reviewed papers about this content? And Henry, when you say this content, do you mean the leading practices document itself, or just the type of material that's in the leading practices to reuse if you're writing other work?
Well, I was referring to the former, to specifically this document, but if you've got papers about related content, that would also be really useful. I think one of the difficulties that we've had over the course of the last 6 years now is it's hard to point to anything other than the papers that we've published. And when you reference your own paper in your own paper, it's not that compelling.
Yeah, so you make a really good point. The leading practices was not meant to be sort of like a research report in itself, I guess. And for publication, for peer-reviewed publication, right, that would be sort of the format and intent behind a peer-reviewed publication. So this document references some research publications about, you know, like components of how to do education and outreach and technical writing appropriately. But it also references like summarizing resources, which is what I would consider this to be as well, that are not peer-reviewed publications per se, but are perhaps useful in a different way because they cover a wider range of scenarios and practices that have themselves been demonstrated otherwise as effective. While it wasn't peer-reviewed, you know, in a similar time frame, UW-Madison put out a report, and I'm the first author on it with our CIO, of how we did research computing facilitation at UW-Madison, given that the term research computing facilitator originated at UW, and what kind of impact that had, including data on how we were better able to engage researchers from, at that time, you know, research domains that were underserved by research computing on our campus, and similarly across many other campuses. So I think it's just, at the time, wasn't envisioned to be something that was the format and intent behind a peer-reviewed publication itself.
Any other questions for Lauren about these leading practices as a whole? Lauren, can you pull up the major activities or go to the front page just so that's visible, just so people can take a look at that? Yeah, we have a few follow-up questions for everyone. So this will not be your last chance to ask questions or talk about this, but yeah, any final immediate questions? Not final questions, immediate questions. Okay, if things come up, add them to the document. The next thing we want to do, so I see one more question in the chat that I'll maybe throw to you in a minute, Lauren, but the next thing we want to do is just get people's general impressions and how this leading practices document and how it might relate to you, and kind of touch a little bit on what Justin asked about, which is maybe what has changed in the past 4 or 5 years. And then we want to branch out into more like, what could this document do for you? What are other resources in the community that are similar to or complement some of the information that's provided here? So I'll go ahead and put up, thank you, Amy, who's put up the poll. So our first question is, there were 10 activities of facilitation listed in the leading practices, and for you to pick 5 that best represent what you do. So I think our goal here is to get a sense for like, what are people doing on the ground, and how does it align with some of these practices that we've talked about. And same link as before, mentee.com, same numerical code. And then, yeah, Lauren, I don't know if you saw Paula's question in the chat about facilitate versus consult or consults. I have any thoughts while we're voting?
Yeah, so as we were toying with the right term at UW, and then certainly in the ACI-REF project, and as we conversed with others about what the right terms were, liaison seemed to be like a specific component of facilitation, but not inclusive enough of sort of also being the human interface as people need help in using ACI services and resources. We thought about concierge as well, and consultant. I saw both of those pop up. Concierge sounded a little bit more like liaising, like pointing people to the right resources, but not necessarily being involved in helping them develop their own practices and to sort of optimize their use of ACI services. And then consultant had some sort of conflicting ambiguity, in that sometimes consultants are somebody like an outside consultant that you would pay to actually do work. And sometimes consultants are kind of more like a facilitator in that liaising role, helping you to choose between different options of services or practices or tools. And so we just wanted to avoid that, and was part of why we didn't choose consultant. Facilitate seemed to be more inclusive of all of the aspects of facilitation that we found to be most common and important to have together to support use of ACI.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. The votes are accumulating. I wanted to give everyone a little time for this one because there are several activities. And if you aren't familiar with the leading practices, it might take some time to think about, yeah, like which 5 are the most representative of.
I think it's interesting that there's
doing.
something in every single one of these categories. I was wondering how this was going to go.
Okay, so I think it's interesting, one might even say encouraging, that the ones that seem to be rising to the top engagement, education and training, assisting are all pretty researcher focused, which makes sense for a lot of us being on the researcher facing track call of the People Network. And which was also I think the goal of a lot of the activities described in the leading practices is researcher centric, although we have, I think, these other things. I see metrics and assessment moving up the list. There's other components of research facilitation that aren't necessarily researcher centric. Yeah, any of the other organizers, Bob or Justin or Amy or Jana or whoever else I've missed, Martin maybe, Gladys, want to chime in on any comments on the activities or survey results?
I think that they apply it really well. You know, when I was filling the information right now, I'm thinking, okay, which one are the ones that I do most? And I think that I absolutely agree with what I'm seeing right now, you know, engaging with the researchers. At least here in our community, we do a lot of education and training. Even though that we're a small group, we do tons of workshops every semester. And the facilitation with Research Connection is something that we do too. We do use the word here at UVA of consulting projects, and each of us team members, we do a lot of consulting, right? So we work, you know, up to 3 months or 6 months with a specific research group just to do the consulting part, you know, according to the area of expertise. And so I would have liked to see that word there, but I understand that can be conflicting somehow.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Gladys. And I think from your comments and what Lauren said and some of the things in the chat that, yeah, consulting can mean different things to different people. Okay, so
I have a comment I want to make on
yeah,
this
go
one.
ahead, Jana.
So I'm just really struck by the breadth of what we're describing here. I mean, that initial one, engagement with researchers, I think of that as making sure the research community knows what resources we can provide. So when they get to the creative problem solving of how am I going to address my research question computationally, they know what their tool options are. But then you get all the way down to the nitty gritty of, like, you know, I don't know how to use, you know, MATLAB or, you know, the breadth there. And then that metrics and assessment piece. That's so interesting too, because that's communicating up. That's making sure that administration understands that we're valuable and providing really useful resources. So it's like we have to let people know we exist. We have to do the work, and then we have to justify the work, all in the same bundle of responsibilities.
Yeah, thanks, Jana. Lauren, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, and I can put my hand on now. You also brought up, Jenna, what I think is an important point of clarification that maybe also indicates that, like, finding the right terms can be difficult, because what we mean in the leading practices is, like, engagement is like that consultation, that meeting with a researcher that to provide personalized, proactive guidance, whether that be on what resources they consider, or like even how they're specifically going to use a particular resource or service. And that's part of why we separated it from outreach, meaning like going out and like making sure the masses are aware of what's available, including facilitation services. But engagement at the time was, and at least at UW-Madison, still is kind of how we refer to that first meeting. We call it an engagement, or even sort of follow-up personalized consulting meetings.
Yeah. Thank you both. I think those are really helpful reflections on these activities. So I do want to make sure we have time for all the little subtopics we wanted to address. So I'm going to have Amy advance the slides. And so kind of building on sort of what was asked and what has been referred to a little bit in the discussion so far. Is there anything in the past 3 to 5 years that has, well, a lot has changed. That's an obvious question, but anything in the past 3 to 5 years that would necessitate additions or changes to this document. So I know for those of you where this is the first time seeing it, you might be like, well, I don't know what's already there. But I guess thinking broadly about what do we need to do or know how to do now that we maybe didn't have to know how to do 3 to 5 years ago? Might be another way to think about that question. This is an kind of open response. Again, we'll give everyone a minute to think about it. But we want to ask this question and then kind of pivot to how can this document or other community resources either fill these gaps or just generally fill training gaps in the community.
Christina, can we vote twice?
You'd have to ask Amy. I think you only get one shot. If you have a second idea, you can throw it in the chat. Okay, so I'm seeing online training, demand for facilitation, data, size, partnerships with the data community, which I think was definitely one of our hidden agendas in offering this call series. Security, diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's a great addition that's not really explicitly present in these particular materials. I maybe already said cloud. That's definitely something that I thought of. Someone said online training. Like, we definitely wrote these leading practices in a time when it was assumed workshops were going to be in person, not online. So good ones. Amy, is there anything else that you're seeing that I haven't known?
I'm interested in I'm seeing several of like security and compliance. And I know that's really big at our institution at Berkeley.
Yeah.
Interesting, this dealing with cultural barriers and difference between research computing and enterprise IT. I think there's been a lot of good articulation about that in our community. And so I think that's a great idea to add it here.
Yeah.
Version
we should have done something where you could upvote, but
these are great.
Yeah, these are great.
Sensitive data, so it's related to the compliance. Nice. These are all really great ideas, everyone.
Yeah. Thanks all. So at this point, I'm going to transition the call over to Bob, I think. So we wanted to present the leading practices, get a little sense of where they fit into people's roles and what might be missing, and then talk a little bit about how to change them, update them, but I really want to frame the conversation as like community resources for having this kind of information and training. And so Bob, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thanks. So I want to say that poll was actually an amazing, I think, opportunity as a lead-in for this section. And I'm sort of introducing the section as Christina said, is how can we use the leading practices document beyond research computing, and I think how could we? One question is what can this document do, or can this document do more for the community? And I think some of the answers that we got there are perfect for that. And I also I'm asking the question of what other resources are there for learning and training in this space. As we really thought about the opportunities for training as a facilitator or coaching as a facilitator, I think when this the ACI-REF project started quite a number of years ago, I think about 7, 8 years ago, there wasn't much out there. And since that time, we actually do have some programs out there. So I first want to take the opportunity to introduce Dirk Colbry. He's and also then Henry Neeman. I'm going to have them, each of them speak a few minutes about the programs that they've run around training. But while they're speaking, if Amy, can I have you queue up the next one? I'm going to say, let's, the next question is, if you would select the 3 top areas in which you'd like to see or feel that there should be more training. And so I'll introduce Dirk and let Dirk speak. Dirk is the Director for Graduate Recruiting and in the Department of Computational Mathematics, Science and Engineering at Michigan State University. And Dirk is brought to the area or our profession as cyber ambassadors.
Thanks, Bob. I'm going to steal the screen if that's okay. All right, so everyone can hear me well, okay, everything, like see the screen, good stuff. So I'm just gonna give you a quick introduction to the Cyber Ambassador Program. Actually, I recognize a lot of names, so sorry if this is a little redundant, but this program came out a few years ago to develop professional skills training for CI professionals. So really research facilitators is what we tend to focus, although we've branched out into a lot of other areas because these skills can be provided to lots of different people. So again, we were funded by the National Science Foundation. Well, thank you. Again, we were funded under the cyber training grant through the NSF. There's our website. I'll have it at the end again, and I'll put it in the chat. But the idea is came from this my background, right? All these good grants come from taking 2 ideas that you have and putting them together. So I had been teaching professional skills training to undergraduate engineers for 20 years. And what we have learned is engineers know the technical stuff, but they don't often know the communication, teamwork, and leadership type skills. And so we had been teaching something through Tau Beta Pi, which is the Engineering Honor Society. Well, as I've been teaching that, I've also was a campus champion, and I'd been working since the TerraGrid age as a campus champion and a research facilitator. And I kept thinking, we need more research facilitators, although back then we didn't have that term. So, and I said, why don't I start teaching the professional skills that I teach the undergraduate engineers to research facilitators? I thought that was a cool idea. I thought that was a neat matchup, and the National Science Foundation agreed, and they funded us. So what we've been doing is connecting with a lot of different groups. We're not trying to create our own group, although essentially we did, but we didn't want to. We wanted to be more of develop the curriculum and train people to use that curriculum and then let it disperse out into the communities that needed it. And so we've been working a lot with a lot of different groups with that in mind. So the curriculum, the core curriculum consists of 9 different modules. You can do a training up as small as an hour. And if you do everything, it would take 24 hours, which we've done both. And so we have teamwork, 3 modules in teamwork, 3 modules in communication, and 3 modules in leadership. And the curriculum is developed. We have a manual that we're writing right now to explain how to use it. We also have slides that are open source. Everything's open source. The idea here is to get it out into the public. So we provide all of this as open source materials. And then the other big thing we did, which I think is almost more important, is we have been doing a lot of training the trainers events. And so we've been teaching people how to take these materials and present them at their own institutions, and then encouraging them to learn how to do workshop facilitation for professional skills, and giving people an opportunity to do it themselves. Because, you know, the PIs on this project can only go so far, but if we wanted exponential growth in this project. So that's me, and I'm happy to answer any questions when we're done.
Great. One question for you, Dirk. How many people have gone through the program, and how many retrain events have you had?
We just did the count, and we're over 4,000 total, 4,000 300 and something, I think, is the official count. Although I am stealing from Henry a lot of those. So so a big chunk of those actually, but yeah, we've been doing a lot. We've trained about 51 facilitators who have now gone off and done their own workshops, or most of them have gone off and done their own workshops. So we get that kind of exponential growth. I haven't counted all of their workshops, but I'm hoping we get close. We get close.
Great, great. Well, thank you. Amy, if you can show us what the poll looks like now. So just a reminder, if you haven't, please, vote for what your 3 areas that you think that either you'd like more training or we should, think about more training or training opportunities. So metrics and assessment, enhancing CI knowledge, interesting, interfacing. Although metrics and assessment is the lead out, they all seem to be really close. Do you have any, Amy, how many numbers, or what's the count? Is that 28? Is that what that says?
I'm not able, I don't see.
Lower right.
Oh, my Zoom panel's in front of it. Yes, looks like 29 people.
Okay, all right. Interesting, interesting. Okay.
Still time
we'll
to
come
get
back
your votes in.
Yeah, please get your votes in. And I also then want to introduce Henry Neeman, as Dirk had referenced, being stolen from. I like this. So Henry Neeman's a director. Many of us know him for the virtual residency program, which he started in 2015. He's director for OU Supercomputing Center and Education and Research, an associate professor at College of Engineering at the University of Oklahoma. He's going to talk about the virtual residency, which has been going on for about 6 to 7 years, and then his new project.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm going to have to zip through stuff because I have too much content. But so the virtual residency program, the idea is to teach pre-service and in-service facilitators how to do facilitation or how to do it better. This aligns very closely with what Dirk is doing, so it's not a surprise that our brand spanking new project, Dirk and I and Dana Brunson are the PIs together. So what do? The big thing, we have an annual workshop. We've been doing that since 2015, as Bob mentioned, and I'll have some numbers in a moment. We do workshop planning. So the workshops are designed by the community. That is, me and my local colleagues designed the first one in 2015. And ever since then, it's been developed each year by the community based on what the community needs. We try to hold an annual meeting at SC this year, and last year, of course, not so much. We do a couple of apprenticeships that I'll talk about in a minute. One to teach people how to write grant proposals, another to teach people how to write scholarly publications, because both of those build credibility with researchers. The more you act like a researcher, the more researchers believe what you say. And before we developed it, no one had ever been dumb enough to try and do this. So we decided we would be the dumb people. We've presented this now to over 1,100 people from over 400 institutions in every US state and every EPSCoR jurisdiction. We were happy to have Guam join us in June. So we now cover all of those, plus 13 other countries on 5 continents. I do not hold out hope for Antarctica. That includes 1/6 of all bachelor's granting minority serving institutions and 1/10 of all minority serving institutions in total, because many minority serving institutions are community colleges or career techs. Over 100 non-PhD granting institutions, about 1/4 of the total, over 100 institutions in every EPSCoR jurisdiction, again, about 1/4 of the total. About 2/3 of the institutions are in the Campus Champions, and about 80% of the Campus Champions institutions have participated. We've done very, very well with diversity, equity, and inclusion. Compared to the discipline as a whole, we double the percentage of women compared to the SC conferences, and we almost double the percentage of underrepresented minorities compared to all computing and IT occupations. And here's some more numbers about that, blah, 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 blah. I'm not going to spend time because we're pressed here, but I do want to talk for a minute about the apprenticeships. They've had excellent uptake. So more than 1/3 of the virtual residency institutions have participated in the grant proposal writing apprenticeship. The way I learned to write grant proposals was by writing a grant proposal as co-PI with someone who already knew what they were doing as PI. And I learned an enormous amount from him. And we thought, well, why can't everybody do it that way? So we just opened up the process of writing a grant proposal to everyone. We failed 3 times. And then just last month, we started our first award based on the grant proposal writing apprenticeship. Same principle applied to paper writing. So we have published 3 papers about the virtual residency program at the PERC conferences based on a community effort, over 100 people in each of these efforts, almost 200 in grant proposals. The grant proposal writing apprenticeship is now on hiatus because we succeeded. And so we're taking a year off, and then we'll write another proposal, a follow on to this one, to get more funding for more years. We hope, knock wood. But this is something that's been very, very successful, has covered a huge number of institutions of many different kinds. Does it work? Well, last year, the external evaluators, the same folks who do the evaluation for Exceed, did an evaluation for our workshop, the 2020 workshop. The worst rated session we had was a 3.9 out of 5. Most of them were above 4.0, almost all of them. Underrepresented minorities reported that they liked it better than everybody else. Women found one session that they liked 10% worse than men, and everything else was not statistically significantly different. And then there's a wonderful indirect measure of does it work, which is people keep coming back. Now, in order not to do this as human subjects research, I'm reporting it by institutions instead of individuals, but 3/4 of institutions have come back after having first participated. And that's without subtracting off the ones who just started in June. I didn't subtract those folks off. They're included in that 3/4. And most of those 3/4 have participated in multiple types of activities. And, you know, we're all busy. If it sucked, why would anyone come back? And why would they recommend it to their colleagues at their institution? Here's 5 papers that we published, 3 of them under the paper writing apprenticeship, all of them at PERC, except one of them at the Exceed conference, which was the predecessor to, or one of the predecessors to PERC. So you can read up on what we've been doing, and we have plans for publishing the next thing that we're doing, which Bob mentioned, which is a new program that we just got funded, started September 1st, called the Certified CyberInfrastructure Facilitator Training and Development, pronounced CIFTED. So by certification, we do not mean like a graduate certificate program, a matriculated program. We do not mean a certificate of participation. This is more morally equivalent, for example, to getting CISSP or one of these database certifications, or Red Hat certified engineer, something like that. And by the way, if you Google CIFTED, we are the 3rd link currently, which is great because we don't even have a web page yet. We are not the Canadian Center for International Fisheries Training and Development. I'm sure they're wonderful. It's a first of its kind. Again, not matriculated, and it's based on badging. So we create badges, so a training module, an exam, and a scoring rubric. And then when you've gotten a certain collection of badges, that certain collection of badges will get you the certification. We're not expecting gigantic numbers, and that's why we couldn't do it as a degree program. If we were going to get thousands and thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of people, then degree programs would pop up all over, like it's happened with data science. But with the numbers we're talking about, it's unlikely. Here's an unhappy example where there weren't enough numbers to sustain the thing. Texas State Technical College is a community college. About 10 years ago or so, they created an HPC sysadmin associate's degree. That failed because they didn't get uptake. Then they switched it to cloud. That failed. All of that's gone now, and they have a whole bunch of different other stuff. Their cybersecurity program, I think, is going really great. But the things that people don't understand, they don't keep doing. I'm going to stop there. I got tons more material. We have our first meeting with what's called our board of expert advisors in about an hour. So these are actually, this is the first time I've taken these slides out of the box because they're the slides for that meeting. You're actually welcome if you're on the virtual residency mailing list. You've already gotten the email for how to attend that meeting. You're welcome to come join us an hour from now.
Great, thank you, Henry. Really appreciate that. So in the last few minutes, I do want to be respectful of people's time. I have two bigger questions to ask because I think, you know, although it's great to talk about the leading practices, where they've been, are they still relevant? But I think the more pertinent question is, can we do something with them? Can we evolve them? And how can we, make them more useful, or bring them to be more relevant, or improve them, et cetera. And so what I'm going to do is ask two questions. Amy's trying to put in I put her on the spot, the suggested improvements from the poll. So while she's working on that, I'd like to direct everyone to go into the call document towards the bottom of the document. And I have a section there that says, can we improve, or how can we go about improving the leading practices? And I invite you to actually type in some suggestions on what can we do. I see Amy getting that in. So what can we do about how can we improve, or how can we go about improving the leading practices? I know we had the discussion with the data-facing track on looking at how we could bring in the library community, or open up that, because they've been doing facilitation for quite a long time. So I think there are opportunities here for us to work with them and other communities that are doing facilitation, so that it's just beyond sort of the research computing center. So I invite you to jump in the bottom there and type in your suggestions on, can we improve, or how can we improve? How can we go about? I meant to say here, how can we improve? How can we improve, or how can we go about improving the leading practices? So that's the first one. And then homework. Amy has also pasted in the comments on the improvements of the gaps. Enhance, great. Thank you, Ashley. I like that. Enhance or evolve. In a section up above, we have the suggested improvements or gaps. And I'd like you to take the opportunity now, or after this call, to look through and indicate one to three of the items that you think are relevant. And if the item has already been enumerated, then go ahead and upvote it. Because I think it would be a great opportunity for us to have the community sort of coalesce and come together on what people feel the most important ones would be to work on. Not to say that we can't work on all of them. Certainly there are enough people in the researcher-facing community. I think we have about 1,000 people on the People Network list. So there's plenty of people to go around for suggested topics. So again, in the bottom, how can we improve or enhance? Or how can we go about doing such for the leading practices? And then also what improvements or what has changed in the last 5 years, and indicate the ones that you're interested in. And with that, I want to thank our speakers, Henry and Dirk and Lauren, but I'm going to turn it over to Jana, who actually has the pleasure of doing that. So thank you.
Yes, but this is a day we need to just note some milestones and some landmark events. So I just want to really thank Amy Nesser and Bob Freeman for all of their contributions to the Researcher-Facing Steering Committee. And yes, I am mentioning this because they are going to be contributing in new ways moving forward. But it's been great working with you guys, just super yay. And thank you. And Bob, I have to say, your still photo that you have up now when you're not having video, that made my day. So thanks everybody. Today's call was improving our people-facing skills, revisiting the leading practices of facilitation. So this is ongoing work into helping our profession be sustainable and constantly improving. Special thanks to our presenters. So Lauren Michael of UW-Madison, Dirk Colbry, Michigan State University, Henry Neeman of University of Oklahoma, and special thanks to Christina, Amy, and Bob for leading this call. Our next call is going to be November 11th. Please visit our call topics survey and help us shape this conversation moving forward. And then thanks also to the researcher facing steering committee. Okay, but wait, the researcher facing steering committee is a really great group of people, and you do want to be part of it now that you've thought about it. Yeah. So please reach out to Justin Booth. So that's boothj@msu.edu. And come and join us. We meet once a month to go over the call, then we take different assignments to be part of the call. As others have mentioned, that many hands make light work, but there are a lot of interesting tasks you could be a part of. So thanking the researcher facing committee members who worked on this call: Justin Booth, Gladys and Dino, Christina Koch, Martin Kuma, Annalie Rugg, Amy Nesser, Katya Blokova, and Bob Freeman. And I'm Jana Nugent. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you in November.
Thank you. Have a great day,
Thanks, everyone.